Hello and welcome to another Times Radio members question and answer. Now today we're answering comments from our channel members on the Frontline episodes that have been out this week and other episodes about the war in Ukraine and its impact in the world stage. I'm Philip Ingram, currently hosting Times Radio Frontline, but also I commentate in lots of different channels on everything that's going on in Ukraine, other conflicts around the world, defense matters, geopolitics, security, cyber, and anything else that people want me to comment on. But I'm going to get straight into your points and your questions. The first one comes from Astro. Astro, welcome back. And you said, based on Bill Browder's observation that sanctions on a few non-Russian refiners would do the trick, the latest announcement looks like weak tea. There were a lot of Americans doing business with Rosneft and Lukoil. I wouldn't quite describe it as weak tea. Those are probably the two largest Russian oil companies in the world and doing the majority of the business. And it's not just sanctioning the companies, but it's the potential for the sanctions on those that are doing business with the companies. And it's early days yet, but we're picking up indicators that both Chinese and Indian companies are suddenly going, we need to step back from this because we don't want the wrath of American sanctions coming further down on us. If that happens, it's going to have a massive impact on Russia. Combine the sanctions against oil exports, which will reduce Russia's ability to export oil, with what Ukraine is doing in destroying oil refining capacity, oil storage capacity, and oil pumping capacity. It'll get to the point where Russia has got nowhere to store all of this crude oil, and it hasn't got the ability to get it out to market. If it can't store it, it then has to think about closing oil wells down. As soon as you close an oil well down, then from what I understand, technically, it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to open it up again. So this is going to have a massive impact. And in fact, where this has happened beforehand, I think in the past, and someone will correct me if I'm wrong, the Russians have just pumped the oil straight out onto the land somewhere, not caring about environment or environmental pollution, so they didn't have to close their oil wells down. So this is potentially significant. Let's see how long it lasts. Next question comes from Tim. Tim, you say, I disagree about sanctions. Trump is compromised. He will taco, i.e. chicken out, yes, and he will not hurt Putin. Well, his announcement, I think, will hurt Putin. He's reining back and stepping back from providing physical weapons. He's clearly frustrated at Putin, but every time Putin then manages to get hold of him, he changes his mind and comes back to putting a collective arm around Putin and supporting him. So we've got the meeting of the Coalition of the Willing today in London, and President Zelensky is across at that. We've got European and NATO leaders interacting with Donald Trump again. So I suspect we'll see him go slightly more hardline against Putin. Whether Putin manages to then get to see Trump or not, I don't know. And if he does, we'll see Trump flip-flop back to Putin's view, unless that can be interfered with by European, NATO, and other global leaders. It's very difficult to predict. That's the trouble. And Putin knows that he can play Trump, and that's the trouble as well. So the ball is now back in Putin's court. Let's see what happens next. Deborah, you come in with the next point, and you say, what can Europe do more to help? Frozen assets, Storm Shadow, Taurus, no-fly zone, make it over western half of Ukraine so Ukraine can focus on the east, right? Well, the answer is all of those, potentially. More long-range missiles. Work with the Americans to get the restrictions on anything that contains ITAR-related material. And ITAR is where it's something that has got a US defense restriction on not just who it can be sold to, but how it can be used. That's why Storm Shadow and Scalp, they're the same missile. But the British versions and the French versions can't be used because they've got US guidance systems in them. They use the US military GPS system, which is different to the civilian GPS system. It's much more accurate. And that's why the Americans have got to say over where they can be used. I understand those restrictions have now been removed. But frozen assets, yes, greater use of the frozen assets. Currently, it's the interest from the frozen assets that's being used to pay for a lot of things. But You could take the whole chunk, $300 billion worth. Taurus, I think, would help more politically than anything else. I think the Storm Shadow scalp will do everything that Taurus will do. If Tomahawk ever comes in, it'll do that. The Ukrainians have got Flamingo. Flamingo, I understand, are having some difficulties with their accuracy. I'm not surprised with a new missile like that. But again, we can help the Ukrainians with more technology to improve the accuracy of Flamingo. That might be more effective than providing Taurus, but it would be good. And yes, a no-fly zone. And potentially, if the Ukrainians asked some nations on a bilateral agreement to come in and help protect its borders in the east, those nations could come in and do that. And that is perfectly legal. It does not require a NATO mandate or anything else. That would free up Ukrainian troops from guarding the border with, say, Belarus to go off to the east. But whether there's the willingness of other European nations or other global nations to come and do that on behalf of a coalition, they're willing or not, we have to see. I think we're a little bit off that at the moment. And it will throw up many more questions about protection, about what you do to the Russians if they did attack, etc., etc. But yes, a no-fly zone over the east would be a potential start to that and a good thing. But all good points. Lars, you bring in the next point. You're talking Taurus. Taurus requires a different type of integration with the carrier aircraft than Storm Shadow. From what you understand, Ukraine only has aircraft that it can't be fixed to. This is not a mechanical problem. It concerns data structures, links, and sensors. Strange that experts don't address this problem. Maybe some Typhoon jets would be useful. Lars, yeah, you're 100% right. Typhoon jets, it would take the Ukrainians 6 to 9 months to learn how to fly them, to learn how to fight them in an environment to release the weapons. You're talking another 2 years. So that's probably not a starter in any way, shape, or form. There are old Mark 1 Typhoons available, but it would be too complex to get the Ukrainians brought up to speed for that. And then to start to fly them in more complex environments, you're talking 3 to 5 years. People think that give the Ukrainians an aircraft and they can fly it and will fight it. No, they'll lose them. 100%. They'll just lose them. They'll be shot down by the Russians. So, yes, I believe you're right with Taurus. The integration issues are significant. And this is where the Germans don't necessarily want to provide the level of support that they'd have to do in country to make that integration work. And I suspect there's probably a bit of German concern that they may not work as well, or they may not have as many of them as they have led the German population to believe that might be there, and therefore they're concerned about their own ability to use them and everything else. It's more political than military, but it's a good political statement. We'll see what happens with Taurus. Chancellor Merz, before he came in, said within 24 hours he'd be supplying them. He now hasn't done. There's much more to this story, and I suspect it's to do with domestics. AJ, you bring up next point, and you say, I don't think China will back off strong enough to stand their ground. Same applies to India. The planet moved and Europe is left behind. UK tries hard to bury its head in the sand. Reality check here. I agree with you. UK is burying its head in the sand. Lots of waffle coming out of our government about increased defence spending when in reality we're getting defence cuts. Europe is advancing, but not as fast as the rest of the world. India, I think, is concerned because it's trying to balance relationships with Russia, with the West, and with China. Interestingly, it didn't have a good relationship with China until we saw Indra Modi with Xi Jinping at the large Chinese parades earlier this year. So it's interesting to see how that will develop. China is in a very strong position. They have been warehousing lots of oil, gas, storing it for rainy days. They've got capability to survive. They know that they can bring pain to the US economy and to the rest of the world's economy just as much as the United States can bring pain to them. That would not be good for anyone. And that's why China is sort of easing off. It's not doing everything it can do, but tensions are growing. And we live in an even more dangerous time as those tensions grow. There's no sign of them coming down yet. So, AJ, let's watch this closely. A final point comes from Marty. And Marty, you say, Does it feel like many people are not bothering much about a war somewhere else and just see the spending and money that goes somewhere not here? Surely politicians need to make it clear that the cost of not supporting Ukraine is going to be much higher should they lose compared to helping them win now. Well, Marty, you're 100% right on that second point, and the cost would be much higher if we had to get into a shooting war, and we know Putin's not going to stop, and therefore it would lead to a shooting war at some stage in the future. We're talking of 10, 15, 20, 25% of GDP minimum will be going on defense. But coming back to your first point, where people seem to think that the spending goes somewhere not here, the reality is it's all spent here, whether the United States, or the United Kingdom, or Germany, or France. Just think about it. We are not giving a blank check to Zelensky, who's putting it into his bank account and going out to the Walmart equivalent for ammunition and aircraft and tanks and everything else, and with the money that you're giving them, negotiating a good deal to buy them. No, we're manufacturing those capabilities in our own countries. That manufacturing is at a cost that is then being allocated against what is being given to Ukraine, and then it's donated to Ukraine, or in American terms, purchased by Europe to go to Ukraine. So that money is being invested in jobs, in companies and manufacturing capability, in training in our universities and our colleges, in supply chains in our own country. It is benefiting taxpayers in our own country. And people need to wake up to that. And why our politicians aren't saying that, I really don't know, because they're being very, very naive. The more we spend on defense domestically, the more that money is being invested domestically, the more jobs it creates, the more tax revenue that will come into our various economic leaders. That's a good thing, isn't it? Right. Anyway, those are my views. But thanks for watching this week's question and answer and posting your questions. Remember, if you want exclusive access to our videos and to have your questions answered, please sign up for Times Radio membership. Also, remember that you can get us on your favorite podcast outlet. Just search for Times Radio Frontline. Thank you. Goodbye.